they have weakness in their body. It may be in their face, in their stomach, in their jaw, whatever. In our Christian walk with God, our faith was tested, especially those things that we are weak. The same thing with Abraham. So the test came also, at the time Abraham experienced both victory and defeat. And thirdly, the test came in the most unexpected way. When God called him to go to Mount Moriah, Abraham had no idea what God intended. He had no reason to imagine God would want him to sacrifice his own son. He has no idea, and nothing in his experience with God could have prepared him for this moment. His only son, can you imagine that? Unexpected way when God told him to sacrifice. Probably, like parents who are here, you have 3, 4 children. If you will sacrifice one, it's still difficult, right? But for Abraham, his only one son, in an unexpected way, he want them. That his faith was tested. And fourthly, the test was never repeated anywhere else in the Bible. This is the only time God ever asked anyone to sacrifice his son. As such, stand alone in the spiritual record. Thus, fourth, the test was never repeated anywhere. How we should view in its light of Abraham's life? It stands as the supreme and most extreme example of his faith. I wish, beloved in the Lord, you and I, we have the same faith like Abraham. When we are tested, we can follow and we always pass the test. God meant to put Abraham on the spot by asking him to yield to the Lord, the Son, who was himself the embodiment of God's promise. But in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19 tells us, Abraham believed that even if he put in his own son to death, God would raise him from the dead. My beloved in the Lord, when God put us the tests, sometimes it's so difficult to accept it and to follow it. But if our faith and our focus is on the Lord like Abraham, I assure you that we will pass the test victoriously. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. Because in this verse, we learn something that is only hinted in Genesis 22. Twice in the chapter, Abraham intimates that he expects some way, God is going to work things out to Isaac, would lead. When he saw Moriah in the distance, he gave this instruction to his servant. In Genesis chapter 22, he said to his servant, Abraham told to his servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there, and we will worship, and then we will come back to you. Look at the key word. We will come back to you. Genesis 22, verse 5. Did you get that? He said, we will come to you. He said, not I will come back to you, but we will come back. Abraham believed because of his faith. Believed. He and his son would somehow return together. Then as the two of them walk along, with Isaac carrying the wood for the sacrifice, the son asked his father, where is the lamb? In verse 7 of chapter 20 of Genesis, where is the lamb of the burnt offering? And Abraham replied, hopeless situation, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. You know, Abraham reasoned from what he knew about God, what he knew about the situation. The only thing that he could come up, this was, I'm going to put my own son to death, and the God will raise him from the dead. It is pretty fantastic if you think about it, especially since no one in history has ever been raised from the dead, and this happened 2,000 years before Jesus Christ. So, beloved in the Lord, sometimes when we put the test and we don't know what to do, you know what? God will provide. God will give you something special in your life. Sometimes we don't understand the tests, even the trials in our life. And later on, as you follow and obey God, and you will surprisingly, you will say, wow, thank you. Sometimes you are like, for example, like finding a job. And God is testing you. You applied for many companies. You do your best. You do your part. You pray and everything. You serve the Lord. And then the Lord gave you a supernatural answer that God gave you a job that is better than you are asking. When our faith was tested, beloved in the Lord, we must always put our faith in God. I don't know how big your tests that you have been passed. I don't know what kind of tests will be coming in our life. But when our faith was tested, we will grow in the Lord. Every time we pass the test, we grow, and we grow our faith in God. The same with Abraham. Let's go to number 2. How faith grows, faith tested, and also number 2, faith perfected. In chapter 2, verse 22, you see, James said, you see, that faith was working with his works, and as a result of the works, faith was perfected. What was the stake of on Mount Moriah? It was not just the life of Abraham's beloved son. When Abraham raised the knife to kill his son, he was also in effect of, we might call this the reverse of the temptation Abraham faced when he slept with Hagar. That was an attempt to fulfill God's promise through purely fleshly means. In that case, Abraham refused to wait for God's solution. In this case, Abraham doesn't try to reason out how God will fulfill his promise if Isaac is dead. He determined to obey without asking. It would all work out. Abraham obeyed when he didn't understand. I want to repeat that, beloved in the Lord. Abraham obeyed when he didn't understand. What we can learn here, in your life, in my life, when tests come into our lives, we must obey God. Sometimes we don't understand it. My personal testimony to you, 1991, December 2, when I came here in Canada. I don't know what's happening to me here when I follow my wife in 1991. But I said to the Lord, I want to obey you. And even not thinking that I will be pastoring here in Canada. When I left my home church, I told to my pastor, just a couple of years, I will come back, whatever the Lord's lead. And then after 2 years, I come back to the Philippines. I said to my pastor, for now, God wants me to stay in Canada. And even pastoring in the church here in Canada is not on my list. But God allowed me and helped me to lead a church because of His grace and mercy. So we can stand back and see the story in clear perspective. Did God ask Abraham